What if I told you that the anxiety you feel isn't because you can't cope? It's because Crohn's is literally changing your brain chemistry, and your gastroenterologist probably hasn't mentioned that once. Hi, I'm Kate, and today we're talking about the Crohn's mental health connection and why anxiety and depression aren't a sign of weakness. They're a sign of disease activity. And this matters right now because I see people suffering twice. Once from the physical symptoms, and once from the shame of thinking they're falling apart emotionally. And they don't have to. So now I want to take you back to a period with my son that I don't talk about lightly. When his Crohn's was at its worst, he wasn't just exhausted and in pain, he was anxious in a way that didn't make sense even to him. Scared of things that weren't there, dark thoughts creeping in, and the hardest part was he kept saying, I don't know why I feel like this. Nothing's happened, Mum. I just feel wrong. And I remember sitting with that as his mum, and also as a naturopath who knew enough to know this wasn't weakness, this was biology. But even I had to remind myself of that because the guilt of watching your child struggle emotionally on top of everything else is enormous. My husband went through something similar before his third surgery. The depression that came with his flares wasn't about our life being hard, though it was. It was visceral, it was physical, it sat in his body like a weight that had nothing to do with mindset. And in my practice, I hear this constantly, people saying, I feel like I should be coping better, or maybe I just need to be stronger, or worse, they've been told by someone somewhere that stress is causing their Crohn's, so now they're blaming themselves for being anxious too. If that's you right now, I want you to hear this clearly. This is not your fault. So here's what most people get wrong, including, honestly, a lot of practitioners. The assumption is that anxiety and depression in Crohn's patients are reactive, that you're anxious because life with Crohn's is unpredictable, and it is, that you're depressed because you're grieving the life you thought you'd have, and maybe you are, and yes, those things are real and they matter, but they are not the whole story. The biggest story, the one that changes everything, is that Crohn's is actively, biologically disrupting the system that regulates your mood. Here's a short version of the science, and I'll keep it simple because, like it should be. Your gut and brain are in constant conversation. There's a direct communication highway between them called the gut-brain axis, and it runs both ways. When your gut is inflamed, that information travels straight to your brain. So during a Crohn's flare, your immune system releases molecules called cytokines. Cytokines are inflammatory messengers, and some of them, particularly ones like IL-6 and TNF-alpha, directly interfere with serotonin production and dopamine signaling. Those are your mood-regulating neurotransmitters, the ones that help you feel okay, the ones that help you sleep, feel motivated, feel safe. Crohn's can literally lower your serotonin, not metaphorically, but chemically. And then there's the microbiome piece. The gut bacteria that help produce up to 90% of your body's serotonin are disrupted in Crohn's. The diversity is reduced, the balance is off. So the raw material for feeling emotionally stable is being undermined at the source. So when I say anxiety and depression are part of the disease, I mean that literally. They are downstream effects of inflammation, immune dysregulation, and a disrupted gut-brain axis. They belong in your disease management plan, not in a separate box labeled psychological issues. So the reframe is, you're not struggling to cope with Crohn's. In many cases, Crohn's is making it biologically harder to cope with anything. So, what do we actually do with this? Here are 4 things I want you to walk away with today. Number 1, name it as a symptom, not a character flaw. So the first step is genuinely cognitive. It's changing how you talk to yourself about this. When anxiety spikes or a low mood rolls in, I want you to practice saying, even just internally, this is a symptom, this is disease activity. My son started doing this, and it was quietly transformative. Not because it made the feeling disappear, but because it stopped the second wave of shame and self-blame that was making everything worse. When you stop finding yourself on top of fighting the disease, you actually free up energy, real physical energy. Tell your gastroenterologist, write it on your symptom log. Treat it with the same seriousness as your blood in your stool or a fever, because it is that serious. Number 2, understand the inflammation link and track them together. Your mood and your inflammation are not separate graphs. They're the same graph. In my practice, I ask people to start tracking their emotional state alongside their physical symptoms, because what we often find is that the anxiety and the low mood aren't random. They precede or accompany flares. They can actually be an early warning signal that inflammation is rising. My husband noticed this pattern years in. He'd have a week of feeling inexplicably flat and irritable, and then the physical symptoms would follow. Once he understood that connection, he stopped feeling blindsided emotionally, and he started using it as information. If you notice that your mental health dips before or during flares, that's data. Bring that to your medical team. It matters for how your disease is managed. Number 3, support the gut-brain axis directly. This is where naturopathic support has a genuine role, alongside your medical care, not instead of it. I want to be clear about that. There are things we can do to support the gut-brain communication pathway, specific strains of probiotics. There's emerging evidence for supporting mood in people with gut conditions. This isn't about replacing medication. It's about giving the system better raw materials to work with. Omega-3 fatty acids have anti-inflammatory properties and are also involved in neurotransmitter function. Magnesium plays a role in nervous system regulation and is commonly depleted in people with Crohn's due to malabsorption. These are not miracle supplements. They're nutritional support for a system that's under siege. And then there's the nervous system piece, because the vagus nerve is the main line of that gut-brain highway, and we can actually support its function. Slow, diaphragmatic breathing, cold water on the face, humming, these aren't fluffy suggestions. They're physiological tools that activate the parasympathetic nervous system and calm the inflammatory response. We use breathing techniques with my son during some of his worst physical periods, not as a cure for anything, but as a way to give his nervous system, a moment of safety. Number 4, ask for and advocate for integrated support. And this is a gap I see most often. People are seeing their gastroenterologist for their gut, and if they're lucky, a psychologist for mental health, but nobody is actually connecting the two. Nobody is saying, your depression is being driven by your inflammation, so let's manage them as one condition. You may need to be the one who makes that connection explicit. Ask your gastroenterologist, could my mood symptoms be related to my disease activity? And ask your mental health support, are you familiar with the gut-brain axis and how Crohn's affects mood? Bring people into the same conversation, even if you have to be the one who starts it. And believe me, once you try it, it's not that hard. Because you deserve care that sees the whole picture, not a gut doctor and a mind doctor operating in separate silos while you fall through the gap. We started today with a question. What if the anxiety isn't about coping? What if it's chemistry? I want you to imagine what changes when you actually believe that. When you stop spending energy being ashamed of how you feel and start spending it on supporting the whole system, gut, brain, nervous system, inflammation, together. That's where my son is now, in deep remission. Yes, but also genuinely emotionally steadier, not because life got easier, but because we started treating his mental health as part of his Crohn's management, not separate from it. That's where my husband has been for 20 years, flare-free and emotionally resilient, not because he's tougher than anyone else, but because we understand his body better now. You're not falling apart. You're dealing with a disease that affects your entire body, including your brain. So it's not weakness, it's biology. And biology, it can be supported. So if this helped you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. A fellow patient, a family member, a carer who's watching someone they love struggle and not knowing why. If you want to go deeper on this, on supporting the gut-brain axis, on building a management plan that treats the whole person, well, come and find me. My coaching and the Crohn's Method community are built exactly for this kind of conversation. You don't have to figure this out alone, and you don't have to keep blaming yourself for something that your disease is doing. I'll see you in the next video, and have a beautiful day.